Right. So, gents, we're gonna get on before we get on to our main topic of discussion. We're going to feature we call the Front Five, where we pick out 5 eye-catching, egg-chasing articles from around the rugby sphere, so we can offer a few quick thoughts. So, starting with yourself, Mark, and your article comes from the 42.ie, and it's Kieran Kennedy, and the headline is Munster, Ulster, and Connacht must pick themselves up quickly after European exits.
Yeah, it's a tad doom and gloom from Mr. Kennedy here, young Mr. Kennedy. It's an interesting article highlighting some of the issues all 3 provinces not in blue are having recently. You know, they've all shown snippets of really good form, and then for some reason it seems to have turned on its head, and all 3 teams, after having a relatively good run of form post Christmas, seem to have come stuck in the mud in the last few weeks, especially. So we go from Munster first. Breakdown and discipline issues are what are highlighted, and it was really highlighted in the Sharks game, along with some of the defensive frailties. You know, 130 points conceded in 3 losses is not to be sniffed at, and I'm sure they're spending a lot of time on the training paddock this week, going down to South Africa for what is 2 very tough matches for their run into the URC. Munster are basically hopping on the Glasgow bandwagon, I think, at the moment. I think Glasgow have to win the Champions Cup potentially for Munster to get into the Champions Cup next year if they finish in 8th place, because it's a pretty, I'm not saying they can't go down and do the job in South Africa, but with the South African teams now out of the Heineken Cup, they can refocus on home supremacy down south, and hopefully the Sharks and Stormers will try and get their stronger teams out for their running in the URC. So Munster are definitely up against it there on that front. So as I said, hitching their trail to the bandwagon of Glasgow in the Challenge Cup to see how it goes on. So it'll be a very interesting one, and it'll be sad if Munster don't get into the Heineken Cup. You know, it's as we see with some of the stats over the weekend, they're still in the top 3 teams with Toulouse and Leinster over the last 20 years that have been in the most quarterfinals and semi-finals. So it is a privilege, it's not a right, and they have to go and earn it over the next few weeks, and hope that Glasgow do them a favour as well. Munster finished in 8th, then they're probably coming to the Aviva or the RDS for a game that, you know, an angry Munster team is never a good team to face, and I'm sure Leinster would want to avoid Munster as well in the quarterfinals, a massive banana skin, especially with the Heineken Cup semi-finals and finals potentially coming up. On to Ulster then next, and again, after stringing a few good results together after a blip before Christmas, Ulster were fairly easily beaten by Leinster, you know, last weekend, and they've got again pick themselves up, dust themselves off, find a couple of combinations that seem to work, because I still think they're struggling massively at halfback, and until they get that right, they got some good players coming in. You know, Kitsoff and Newers will add a lot of physicality to that team, but that's next season. For the rest of this season, they need to get a couple of injuries back. They need to get their balance right, I think, a bit better. And they need to be a little bit more proactive in how they go about their game. Their game was very limited. It was almost like watching, I know the conditions didn't help in Dublin, as we were speaking there beforehand, but, you know, I was very disappointed with how Ulster attacked Leinster last week, or didn't attack Leinster last week. And they need to find another string to their bow, I think, going forward. And then finishing with Connacht. Again, it's along these sort of Ulster lines, you know, a very up and down season with Connacht. They've strung some great results, and then they go out and they can see 40 points against Benetton at home. I think, as Kieran mentions in that article, the big problem there wasn't necessarily that going to Benetton was never going to be easy. It was how they sent over not really their full team to Newcastle in the round previously, which probably prevented them getting a sports ground home tie in the quarterfinals, and that probably put an end to their chances in the Challenge Cup. And he does go on to mention how they've never really put 100% into the Challenge Cup, because it's always a great way to get into the Champions Cup, and you can never be guaranteed top 8 finish, or if you're an Irish province, you got to be guaranteed almost top 7 finish to get into the Champions Cup these days. So I've probably harped on a little bit too much in that article, but I think it's a good article that explains the frailties of all 3 provinces that need to be addressed going forward until the end of the season.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot on the pod this season about how Leinster in particular is perceived outside, especially amongst the other provinces. And but I don't think anything highlighted shine the spotlight on that more than what happened last Saturday. At 12 o'clock, all 4 provinces were still in Europe. By 7 o'clock, there was only Leinster still standing. And there's been a lot of discussion since then about what's the difference and what the reasons and all the usual chestnuts came up. But I think with all the people talking about the supposed advantages Leinster have, I think this article plus the next one we're going to go on to sort of give kind of a different take that shows the problems from within those other provinces. And we're going to move on to Tom now for our second article. It's from a publication we don't usually feature here on Harpin, but it's called The Currency, and it's by Brett Igo. And Tom, the headline is "Inside the Boot Room: How Leinster Rugby Builds the Next Generation."
Well, I was away most of the week with the family, and anytime I did dip into social media during the week just to catch up with, to get ready for the weekend's quarterfinal against Leicester, it seemed to be inundated with what you touched on about the advantages Leinster have in population and schools and money and everything else. I think maybe not trying to separate myself from newer, or I should say younger Leinster fans. I get a little touchy, because I remember the days when we stood in Donnybrook with 4,000 looking at against Biarritz when we didn't have money. So I can see the work that's been put on, and it's not all just we have the money now, so I'm very much keen to point out the hard work that goes in behind the scenes. And this article by Brett Igu sort of epitomizes that. Brett is you can follow him on Twitter. He's a rugby analyst and coach with Leinster. As we've mentioned before, that sort of pyramid scheme, for want of a better word, that Leinster have, where the likes of Lancaster and Cullen are at the top, and they have a series of coaches underneath. And that information is passed all the way along to poor souls like me, who are a club coach, youth coach throughout in Leinster. And I've been at different courses over the years with Brett as he's passing on, and he touches it on in this article, the Leinster way. So they're basically passing on the tactics and everything about nutrition and how to prepare for games, all the way through to underage club players throughout Leinster. And as somebody who sees it from that angle, that's why I tend to say, look, it's not all about money. But in this article with Brett, he just talks about the next generation of under-18s. I think it's an under-18 schools team that he's prepping, along with, I think Craig Ronaldson's involved with that team, the ex-Connacht. And there's a lot of people like that in the Leinster system, a lot of experienced ex-players, and that's sort of goes unnoticed when you just see the likes of Stuart Lancaster at the top, that they pick people who are, Trevor Hogan is still there too, and pick people who've a lot of experience and are good at coaching. And he's just talking about the next generation of players coming through with under 18 schools and prepping for this game against Grenoble, who are a travelling team. And again, for people who wouldn't be familiar with the setup, maybe behind, in Leinster, there's 2 pathways. There's the schools pathway and the club pathway. The schools pathway, everybody seems to be an expert on it, because we all know about St. Michael's and Rock and all that sort of stuff. And then at under 19, both teams merge and you get the best of the best. And that under 18's club pathway, obviously he's picking players, Tyke Furlong would be a good example, but there's more and more players, and other provinces are the benefit of those as well. There's a good few of those lads have gone to Connacht as well, that have come through the club side of it and gone to Ulster. So Leinster aren't quite happy to sit on their laurels just having this super school system to rely on. They've been heavily invested in the club side of it for a good 10 years now. And granted, it used to be 95-5, but maybe it's up to 80-20 now with numbers coming through in the academy. And Brett, it's a good article to read because he just touches on that boot room mentality. He touches on that great Liverpool team from the late 70s and early 80s, about how it created an environment of where there's it's what buying into what the club means as much as anything else. And so when people see why Leinster players don't move on, like Scott Penny, your third choice flanker or number 7, because he's been there, so he's bought into the whole. He's been involved with that club for a long time, and that Brett gives a good insight into the input done at underage before these lads get into the sub academy and then onwards to the academy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you talk about you talked about the 2 different pathways at Leinster, and it's important because a lot of people talk about the the private schools as if that's the only way the Leinster players come through. And the other thing about that is not only have they been putting an effort into the other way, and they're proving that every year, but as they're doing that, the private schools are still there too, and they're still producing players, and they're still improving as well. The players are still going to come out of that system. So it's kind of the suggestion that when someone does come out of that system and into the Leinster and Ireland team, well, that doesn't really count. It's kind of trying to delegitimize them, and that it's just frustrating to see it time and time again. Yeah, Mark.
As somebody that came through, when I played, I came through the youth system at Connacht, because I didn't, even though now my old school is a rugby school, it was much more aligned in Connacht because they had to be. Leinster's, as you touched on it, you literally just touched on the point I was going to make there. The Leinster private school system was usually just 3 or 4. Every year you see the same 3 or 4. And the fact that you're now seeing schools like Gonzaga just shows Gonzaga will always be, when I was checking them, and I'm going back 20 years, but then because I've been involved in coaching and playing, you check on all these schools as they're developing. St. Michael's weren't necessarily a big school in rugby when I was playing rugby, 20 years ago.
Newbridge as well, Mark, yeah.
Newbridge as well, Presbray, you would always hear Belvedere, you would always hear St. Mary's, you would always hear Blackrock, Terranure every now and again. So you're talking about 3 or 4 of those main schools, but you're now talking about 10, 12 schools. And you can see it through their under 15 junior cup teams that are in there. It's not always Blackrock that are winning it. I remember an Irish schools team, the dream team that had, the Blackrock dream team that had Leo Cullen, that had Bob Casey, that had Kieran Scally, all those guys. They had half the Ireland team in them. If you look at the Ireland team now, it is so much more, and it's not just in Leinster. It's the other provinces are getting there. It's just that Leinster have done it consistently more for a longer period of time. And they're now seeing the fruits of their labor coming through for the last few years. When I was coming to RFU meetings in 13, 14, 15, you could see that juggernaut was starting to build, because the Leinster coaches were involved in everything. They were happy to share with you, where there was a bit of an insular attitude amongst the other provinces, particularly north and south. Connacht were actually very welcoming as well. I just found the Leinster coaches were very engaging and very happy to share, whereas I found the other provinces were still a little bit more insular with the information they were willing to share and looking to share. And I think that has come back to bite them in the backside a little bit.
Yeah, because that works in the New Zealand model. Of course, the calendar is more friendly for that, in that they play their Super Rugby season, and then they discuss, they talk about what they did, the bits and pieces they did throughout the season when the season's over, to sort of help through to the international team as well. But it's more difficult in Europe because of back and forth internationals and Six Nations in the middle of the season and all that crack. But no, it is true. But anyway, it's good to see. I just wanted to get more points out there on this Leinster success thing, that it's from more than what's being talked about out there. And I think those 2 articles sum it up pretty well.